Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning for our open panel discussion, where we're going to discuss topics with coaches taking over new programs. So we're joined today by Amanda Carmichael, Matt Moore, and Adam Ballard. Coach Carmichael will be entering her first season at Clarksville High School. Coach Moore, formerly of Kokomo and Fishers High School, is now the head man at Warsaw High School, and Coach Ballard is the new coach at Pendleton Heights after a successful run at Covington. Coaches, thanks for being with us this morning.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So for our Q&A today, we have a list of questions that we will ask each of you. When we get to the end of our questions, we're going to open it up to anybody else who might have questions for you guys. So with that being said, let's get started. Our first question for you guys, first off, congratulations on your new job. We're going to start with Coach Carmichael. What attracted you to apply for the Clarksville job?
Well, there are a couple of big reasons for me. I would say, I had thought I was going to stay out of coaching until my daughter got a little bit older. She's 2.5, but I've been at Clarksville as a teacher for the past 2 years. And while I was there, our girls have been through 3 coaches in the past 2 seasons. So number one big reason for me was just to give them some sort of stability. It's not fair to anybody to go through that many coaches in 2 years. The second biggest reason for me was just our administration from top to bottom. And I know that's a huge thing. Our superintendent, Tina Bennett, is a former Indiana All-Star and played at Eastern Kentucky. So she gets it. She's phenomenal. Our school board is great. They're very supportive for all of our sports. All of our administrators are supportive. They've all been involved in athletics one way or another. So, and then my husband, Levi Carmichael, is the athletic director. So just a chance to be there with some awesome people and step into that role and be there with my family. It's not every day you get a chance to do something with your entire family, and they're supportive with my daughter being there and growing up in the program. So just all of those things. It's a great place. Clarksville's got a lot of great things going on, so I felt like it was the right time to get back in it.
That's awesome. Not many of us will get to tell our AD off quite like you will, but we all envy that, I guess. Coach Ballard, obviously you had a very successful run at Covington. You'd been at Vincennes, Reveille, and Delphi as well. Now you're making the jump to Pendleton Heights. What attracted you to Pendleton Heights?
For me, it was a few things. Number one, Pendleton Heights has always been a job that I thought would be a really good job. I feel like they've had great tradition. They've had a lot of continuity in their program over the past 30 years. Had some really good coaches there as well. But for us, it was a location and family thing more than anything else. My wife works in the Fishers area, so she's been driving back and forth from Covington for several years now. So it was an opportunity for us to get a little bit closer for her and my daughter, and not have to spend so much time in a car. But also for me, an opportunity to go to a little bit bigger school and build a bigger program was a real draw as well. That's a challenge that I've been really looking forward to undertaking for several years now, and just really excited to get started with it.
Awesome. Coach Moore, so Coach Moore was around last year for our Feel for the Game inaugural think tank, and got a chance to get to know him. Really good basketball mind. He's coached at the college level. He's coached now at Kokomo and Fishers High Schools, and now he's going to Warsaw. So, Coach, what attracted you to Warsaw?
There are 2 Penguin points here, and that's a big thing. I eat out a lot. I grew up in this area. I was 20 miles away, a Columbia City Eagle, and my early recollections of what basketball meant. We were regional, so you didn't get to Indianapolis, you didn't get to the region, you just kind of had your area, and Warsaw was that program. And my very first basketball experience as a high school player was a freshman starting the JV at Warsaw High School in the Tiger Den. And my very last game as a high school player was in the regional final in the Tiger Den. And I got a chance to spend some time with Coach Rhodes at Logan Sport, who kind of, built that program up to be what it was, won the state championship in '84. And so my entire family's here. We went to Grace College. I met my wife here. In a lot of ways, this is home for us. And so when that opportunity came, it's definitely a basketball community. I don't know how many of those there still are in the traditional sense of what we understand it to be. And if there is a place, this is the place that is still that way.
Awesome. So we're going to move to question number 2 here. Obviously, each of you were motivated to get this job. You obviously prepared for your interview. You got things ready. After you interviewed, what are some things you learned as you were going through that interview process? And then how did you prepare yourself for that interview process? Coach Ballard, we're going to start with you.
Well, there's a couple things I learned. Number one, I learned that I could interview in basketball shorts and a tie. Because a Zoom meeting, they can only see the top of you. So that was, I felt very comfortable with that. The second thing I learned is it's very difficult to read people on a Zoom, in an interview when you're sitting there with a committee or whether it's just 1 or 2 people, you can read body language, how they shift in their seat, where they look when they're asking you questions, things of that nature. And when you've got a screen in front of you, that's really difficult to do. So it's hard to know sometimes what's resonating and what isn't. But as far as being prepared, I actually felt like the preparation was a little easier because as I've got my computer screen pulled up, I can also have a bunch of notes and other things sitting next to me that I'm able to refer back to over and over again. And it doesn't really look like I'm doing that. It probably makes me look smarter because I'm able to come up with a lot more things having those notes there. But what I learned is how adaptable we can be to everything. This COVID stuff threw a curveball that I don't think any of us had ever really encountered before. And to still be able to go through this process and try to take over a new program in a completely new way, it just showed me how adaptable we can be as coaches and just as people in schools in general.
Yeah. So just a couple follow-up questions for you, Coach. Did you guys just have one round of interviews? Did you have a second round? How did that work?
So we had our first round was on Zoom, and then we did have an in-person round, the second round, where we went to the school, and they actually had it set up in the gym with, those 6-foot tables all spaced apart, and we were probably spread out on almost an entire half court, so we were kind of screaming at each other questions and answers. But the in-person round was definitely a little bit more of a what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit more comfortable because I'd done it before. The Zoom was something totally new.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. You mentioned some pros and cons to the Zoom interview. We've all been through the in-person. So my question was going to be, which would you prefer? But it sounds like you would prefer the in-person.
Yeah, I think in-person is great, but like I said, there were some things, with the Zoom, like being able to refer back to notes, being able to have some things kind of not necessarily scripted, but written out in advance, was definitely a helpful, tool to have, but I would certainly, pick in-person over Zoom every time.
Right. Yeah. Coach Moore, what are some things you learned going through that process? You had kind of an idea of what Warsaw was all about, maybe some things that you learned during that, and then how did you prepare for that?
A lot like Coach Ballard, there are things that you can control and there are things that you can't. And I think uniquely I've been in this a few times now in a quicker cycle than probably most. I came from the collegiate level and interviewed at Kokomo 6 years ago, and then the Fishers opportunity opened up and went through that process, and then now with the Warsaw. And I think in all those stages, each of those were professionally the right move, and then honestly personally more than anything. Everybody looks at the timeline of that, and it's 3 years, and in 3 years am I going to be looking again? And there wasn't any thought behind that. It was just where it came from. So for me, it wasn't necessarily about what I learned, but just kind of confirmed things I needed, both professionally and personally, to make the transition up here. There's expectation anywhere you go. And I think us as coaches, we put the most expectation on ourselves. And so I think as I've gone through this process a few times now, it's how to probe and ask questions that you need confirmation on, because I think, everybody's going to present at face value what it should be and what they want it to be. But I think, you really have to dig a little bit to get to the heart of really what you need to know to get confirmation of this is a good fit for me or it's not a good fit for me. And those are things in this time around. I had from the start a good feeling of what I thought it was. And then as I got deeper into it, a lot of that was confirmed and why I ended up taking the job.
Great. So Coach Carmichael, you're in a little bit different situation where you're already in the building. You already know a lot of what's going on. My first head coaching job, I was in a similar situation where I was already in the building. So I've been through interviews where you have that, sense of familiarity, but I've also been in interviews like you have where you don't know. So you just talk about, was there anything that you learned new that you didn't know? And then, talk about the challenges of, I think there are pros and cons already being in the building and knowing. So maybe talk about some of your pros and cons with that.
So some of the biggest pros for me, obviously, were, I've worked there for 2 years. So, and Clarksville's small. So we have a very community type feel. So just already having the relationships with my administrators and having already gone through the interview process with them, once as a teacher. So I kind of knew what to expect. But the biggest thing for me, I think that I learned was how much they actually really care about me. My principal, Adrienne Goldman, was phenomenal. She was like, we want you to do this, but I just want to make sure that you want to do this. So just knowing that it was the right fit because of how much they were concerned about me and my well-being, obviously with my husband being the athletic director, he's had to stay out of it completely. So he wasn't involved at all, but just can we make this work with how much he has to be at school and me being at school. So that was really the big thing for me, is just knowing how much they cared. So knowing that I'm in the right place.
So one of my coaching mentors told me when I started interviewing for jobs, he said, when you get done with your interview, he said, walk out of the building, go get in your car, and when you sit down, don't leave yet. Just start writing down every question that you remember from the interview and keep that for, future interviews down the road. And that way, we all get the easy questions that they just put it on a tee and let you go for it. And then you get the tough questions. So what was the toughest question that you were asked in your interview process? We'll start with Coach Moore on this.
Man, tough, I don't know if for me is the right answer. I think there are some very unique questions that have been asked. But again, to me, as a coach, competitively, you're going into interview, you want to win the interview. And I've been in situations, I've interviewed for 5 positions, and I've fortunately been offered the job 5 times. And so I have a lot of confidence in that setting. And for me, it's a lot about, you do your research, and then you have a premise of like, the tradition or the history of the players and the conference and the schedule. But some of the questions that get me are basically, you figure out in the room who are either the decision makers or the influencers, and you kind of can prepare some of your answers. Not that you're not being truthful, but I think there are certain things that guys and gals in the interviews want to hear about. And so, I think in the Warsaw one, nothing stands out, off the top, but just style of play. That oftentimes is when there's a change being made, and Coach Ogler recently retired. Warsaw's had a style of play that's fit them, and they've had success doing that. And that doesn't mean that people are against it, and it doesn't mean people are for it. I think there's probably a happy mix of both. And so for me, kind of answering what that looks like. And again, all of us in our mind have an idea of what we want our team to play like. It doesn't mean it's going to look like that in year one necessarily, but at the same time, I think our job is to really paint a picture of what something could be. So for me, usually it's the style of play. at the end of the day, all of us want to, play fast and guard people well and score a lot of points and be very efficient and don't turn the ball over. But at the end of the day, if that doesn't help you win where you're at, you're not going to play that way. And you got to really find out what's going to help you be successful, number one. So for me, the question always, how are you going to play? What's your style? I can tell you however it wants to be, but if our kids aren't any good, then, we're going to play to give us the best chance to win in terms of their skill sets.
Yeah, so Coach, one of the things that I'll do, just being a basketball junkie and kind of a basketball nerd, is I'll watch, like if a college guy gets a new job, I'll watch their press conference. And, a lot of it, you hear the same stuff, but every once in a while you get a little nugget here or there that it's like, okay, that'll make you think. But it's amazing how every team in the country wants to play fast. I don't know if you saw on social media, somebody went through and did like a clip of all the press conferences from last spring and how every coach said how fast they want to play. So you're right. That's the easy way to say, here's our style of play, but does it actually fit you? Coach Carmichael, what was the toughest question you were asked?
Well, I think, having the opportunity to interview for several jobs, I think always the toughest question for me at this point is, having two coaches in the household for so long. We have interviewed for lots of jobs and moved around. So that would probably be my first toughest question, is just always having to explain, the moves and why we've made the moves. I know it sounds kind of corny, but I think the other toughest question is always tell me about yourself. Because even the interviews that I've sat in on, on a panel, I feel like you learn so much about somebody from, their answer to that question. I feel like, I'm either in or out on the interview from what somebody gives from the answer to that. And then I thought of one other one, and I feel like I always get asked this, is tell me the last book that you've read. And I'm a math teacher, so I don't read a whole lot. If I'm reading, it's usually something about teaching or basketball. So that's always a tough question for me, because again, you can learn a lot about a person from the books that they're reading.
Yeah. Coach Ballard, your toughest question.
Oh my, well, I'd have to go with Coach Carmichael on the tell me about yourself, or tell me why we should pick you. I've always really struggled with, I'm very much a we guy. I've always struggled talking about me. But also what Coach Moore said with style of play, I think that's always a tough one. What style of play do you want to bring here? And I always respond with, well, what's my team going to look like? Because if I say we're going to shoot a lot of threes, well, if we don't have any guys that can shoot threes, that's a pretty bad answer. So a lot of it depends on, kind of what kind of team we're going to have and things along those lines before I can ever even start to think about style of play. Because I think as a high school coach, you got to cater what you're doing to what you have. We aren't in a position that we can recruit guys into specific spots and things like that. We've got to, our offense and defense kind of has to be homemade, like what we have at, grandma's on Sunday. But one of the questions that wasn't tough, but was very encouraging for me at Pendleton Heights, is there were tons of questions about culture and about program discipline. And I feel like those are two of my biggest strengths as a coach. And so I was really excited to have those types of questions being asked, because in interviews that I'd had in the past, that was hardly ever brought up. And so that was a big indicator to me that Pendleton Heights was going to be a great fit if I was fortunate enough to be offered the job.
Quick question here, just kind of jumping in as I'm hearing some answers. What's interesting to me, if we can just kind of cut to the chase a little bit, Coach Moore was coveted in a lot of respects, and it sounds like Coach Carmichael was as well. So maybe instead of what was the toughest question you were asked, and Coach Moore alluded to this as well, what were some things that you wanted to know, or what was important to you in determining whether or not this is something that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I think for all of us, when we talk about, if you were to list things like what's a good job, like is it facilities, is it tradition, is it feeder, is it pay, is it schedule? I think all of us would put administrative support in the top two, bar none, because in the position we're in, we're the only people that get introduced by our record, right? Like they don't go and say, hey, you know, Dr. Smith had 22 really good knee surgeries and 2 really bad ones last year.
Right.
So people view us based on record and some of that. So for us, I think you have to have administration that get it. And I think it's harder and harder to find. I mean, Amanda alluded to this, that she has people they're sports people. I think in the good old days, we would have people get into administration that used to be coaches. Like they would be done coaching football, and then they'd be the athletic director. And so they could understand what you go through. I think a lot of administration now comes from people making a money jump, and they like administration in that sense, but they don't have any ties to athletics. They either didn't play or they didn't coach. And so to understand the parent dynamic and the kid dynamic and the mentorship dynamic, there's just a gap there. And so for me, I think that's huge, of understanding, you know, you have administrative support. We're going to have tough conversations, and you're going to have to back me in that when that time comes, because it's going to come. And just kind of what that looks like, and kind of building the culture that Coach talked about with, you know, why he's, again, I think he's a modest guy, but like, he's pretty good at what he does. I know that Pendleton Heights is going to be in good hands for a long time.
I'll piggyback on that. Obviously, administrative support was huge for me, but we just didn't have much of a feeder program in place. The girls program hasn't had one for a long time. So that was a big thing for me. You know, how much control am I going to have over the schedules of the middle school, the elementary? What kind of administrative support do I have in those 2 buildings? Can I choose my coaches? That kind of thing. So those were the big things that I was looking at. And fortunately for me, our elementary principal is the wife of an athletic director at another school. You know, we have at the middle school, former players, former coaches in both positions. So I've already been working on schedules in both of those places and kind of making them more suitable for our programs. So you know, just what kind of control do you have from top to bottom was my second biggest thing.
And then Coach Ballard, you know, you had a lot of success where you were. It was going to take, you know, something that was really appealing in Pendleton Heights. What were some things that you wanted to know prior to accepting?
Well, I hate to say this again, but to take away from what Coach Moore and Coach Carmichael just said, those were really the top 2 things that I wanted, you know, to hear about and to see, was that administrative support. And, you know, are you going to be willing to have my back in a tough situation? As long as I don't put you in a bad situation, you know, if I'm doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing, are you going to support me with everything that you got? And then the second part was I wanted a situation that the administration, the community was very hungry for a total basketball program, not just how many games can you win in year 1 or year 2, but are you going to come here and build a comprehensive basketball program from top to bottom? And that's always been my dream. That's always been my goal. And so as soon as I started hearing those things and the conversations that I've had since I've taken the job, I couldn't be any more encouraged by what we've got going here at Pendleton.
That's awesome. So, you know, obviously you were offered the position and you accepted. And, you know, when you first accept that job, I know you're getting, you know, texts, calls, emails. It's exciting. You know, it's cliche, but it really does feel like that whirlwind, you know, so much going on at once. You know, some of you guys had to relocate across the state. So you've got that included as well. But as you look at getting started with your jobs, where do you start? What does that first week look like? What does that first month look like? And I know that with our COVID situation, that's modified this year, but you know, that beginning process when you first take over is so important. So, Coach Ballard, how do you get started in that first week, that first month?
You know, the first thing we did is we started. I started meeting with coaches that had been on the staff the past few years. I had individual meetings with all of them. We've had staff meetings, and we've had 2 or 3 of those up to this point. And then we did a team Zoom meeting, just kind of an introduction for about 15 minutes to talk. Let me introduce myself, get my contact information out, and give players an opportunity to ask any questions or just to see your face and hear your voice coming from you. And so we are actually, we get to start strength and conditioning as a team July 6th, and then we actually don't get to start open gyms until July 20th at our school. So right now I'm doing a lot of administrative things with Booster Club, with youth program, with I'm going to get started with middle school, obviously with our high school staff, getting that finalized and starting to get the direction we want to go there. So it's there's a lot to do, but at the same time, you feel like you're not doing anything because you can't be in the gym and you can't work with those kids. And to me, the biggest part of this business is the building of relationships. And it's really hard to start building relationships just via text message or just via, a phone call or a Zoom call. To me, you've got to be there with them and start working with them. And that's when it really starts to happen.
Yeah, I feel you on that. Like, you feel like there's so much to do, but you can't really do anything, or you're not doing anything because you're not in the gym. But Coach Moore, how are you attacking the start of this new job at Warsaw?
Again, like Coach said, very unique time. I'm getting ready to start year 19. And for me personally, the time away has been much needed. I've watched some Zoom, I've recreated and learned some stuff, but I've kind of needed a coaching sabbatical, if you will. We just added our 5th kid, and so I'm rejuvenated. I'm ready to roll. When I got the go ahead, I think the hardest thing now is, once you learn about it, you got to wait to tell your guys, but you're anxious to meet your new guys, and you got to build your staff, and there's just so many things swirling around, and there's no real good process or order to do that. So for me, it was, I've got some friends and some family up here, so it was starting to build the staff right away. I came up then 2 days after it was announced, and I drove around to 12 of my returning players' homes to just meet them for the first time. I just pulled up, put my window down, said, "Hey, I'm Coach Moore. I'm excited to meet you. I'm looking forward to getting together." And then I called every single parent that was in the program last year. So I called 31 parents just to introduce myself. I don't think you can over communicate when you first get there, because honestly, at some point, somebody's not going to like you, and that's okay. But from the jump, you've got everybody on your side. And so the more proactive you can be to build those relationships like Coach is talking about, specifically with the families, to let them know kind of what your expectations are and what it's going to look like, that's where you start. And so for me, it's getting my staff together and then getting to know our guys on a personal level, because when July 6th gets here and we start running, the competitiveness comes out, and we want to make deposits early so that if we have to make a withdrawal later, the guys understand why that is.
Coach Carmichael, what about you?
I think these guys have kind of hit on everything, but number one for us, this has been an awesome time to just, spend as much family time as we can, because I know when we hit the ground running here on July 6th, it's going to start being, few and further between. So, again, I've been out of it for a while, but it's been really nice to have that just so that, I'm excited, I'm ready to get going, but to maximize that as much as possible. The first thing I did, obviously, I think you're only as good as the people that you surround yourself with. So starting to build my staff, I'm really fortunate to have Stacey White, who is our softball coach. She's been the head coach at Lincoln Trail. Stephanie White at Vanderbilt is her sister. So I can't be any more excited to have her on my staff. I know she's going to make us so much better. My best friend as a teacher in the building is going to stay on staff. She's our girls golf coach. So she's been in the building for a long time. She's also going to be on our staff, and we're getting ready to add another really big piece here in the next couple of days that I'm really excited about. So staff was huge. I mean, you have to have people that are loyal, people you can trust. So that was the number one thing that I really got started on. And then while we were in school, we had kind of a Zoom meeting, every week, every 2 weeks, just to talk with the kids, see what they're doing. It was a little bit different for me because I've had a lot of the kids in class I've been at their games for the past 2 years, so building relationships with them has kind of already been started. But we also put out like a quarantine challenge, some drills for the kids to be working on just over this time, just so they had a ball in their hands. And they turn in those points every week, and they're going to get a t-shirt at the end, for participating in that. So those are kind of the things that we've been doing. And now we're just kind of, we did a book study as a coaching staff across the board at Clarksville. We're starting on the inside out and developing that. So we all did a book study together as coaches, and then just kind of getting ready to start July 6th. So we're a little bit different than Coach Ballard. We actually are not going to be allowed to be in the weight room. Most of what we're going to be doing is going to have to be conditioning outside. So that's where we're going to start on July 6th.
Coaches, all you guys mentioned the importance of a staff, and let me frame this from my experience in taking over Snyder, and then kind of take this and run with it, because I don't know if I know how to articulate it yet. But when I'm meeting with the coaches the initial time, and we're talking about what it is that they could bring, or they're talking about what the program was in the past, it all sounds good, right? Maybe I'm not very good at hiring, but I feel like I could make any coach work in whatever setting. We just need to figure out what it's like when it gets to the day-to-day grind. So what is it that you're looking for in a coach? And then also, do you take the system or the personnel approach similar that we would take with our players? Do you have something in mind that you need your coaches to do? Or do you find the best people available and let them run with their natural strengths, if that makes sense?
I think for me, oh, sorry, Coach.
No, go ahead, Coach. Go ahead.
Okay. I think for me, obviously trust is a big thing. You have to have people who are going to be loyal to you. But the biggest thing for me is I want people who are going to challenge me. I don't want somebody to tell me yes all the time. I don't want them to say, hey, Coach, that's a great idea. If they don't like it, tell me something else. I might get mad and I might pout about it for a little bit, but eventually I'm going to get over it. But I want somebody to challenge me. I want them to make me think about something else, throw some other ideas at me.
Yeah, I completely agree. Basketball knowledge is not one of the top things that I look for in adding people to my staff. That loyalty factor of being loyal to the program, being loyal to the head coach, and not in a way of like, hey, I'm going to do something bad and you better have my back, but just in being able to trust and have real conversations and not have to worry about those conversations leaving the room. The second thing that I look for is, are you going to do things the right way? Are you going to treat our kids the right way? I don't need guys that are going to come in and yell and scream and try and demean people. I don't think that's what coaching is about. And so I'm looking for people that are going to be loyal and work hard, do it the right way, treat kids the right way. And then the last thing for me is someone that can, like Amanda just said, that can tell me the truth, tell me what they think. And what I would add to that is I don't want yes people, but I also want people that can separate it and understand the difference between coaching and personal. And like, if I tell you, no, we're not doing that, that doesn't mean I think you're a bad person or you don't know what you're talking about. It's just, I disagree. And so there's going to be times that you suggest something, I say, no. Don't let that become a personal attack or a personal thing of, I'm going to go pout because I didn't get my way. You didn't take my suggestion, because the next 3 or 4 times, there's a good chance I'm going to say, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, I would say, from a personality standpoint, for me, I'm looking for somebody who can be a teacher and a learner. I think those are big. I think if you get stuck in, and we're the flex, we run the flex, and there's no ability to learn how to maybe do it differently or enhance it as the game has evolved, I think that's big. You got to have people that are teachers. I don't really care if you were, I coached cross country one year, and like, I'm not built to be a cross country guy at all. But, my AD at the time at Logansport said, you're good with kids and you're a good teacher. So go. And I only did it 1 year, and it's the favorite team I've ever had because I had to learn how to coach them and teach them what it was they needed from me. So I think that's important. I think number 2, I got to like you. Like, you're going to spend a lot of time with me, man. If I don't like being around you or you don't like being around me, man, that's not a healthy environment. Your kids feed off that. So that's important for me. Like, the quote of you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Fortunately, Amanda gets to be around her husband a lot, and she works for him and with him and all that. And you go home, and there's still some tension maybe sometimes because of the professional aspect of it. And I think, when you're around a good staff, and I've been very fortunate to have great staffs. It's fun going to work, man. It's fun to go teach and go, and we're not very good, but let's go get better today at closeouts. I need 2 things. I need guys, or I want guys that desire to be head coaches. That's important to me. I got a great opportunity with Al Rhodes at Logansport at bare bones to see how it was done. And he put me on, and I'm forever indebted to him. So in my 11 years as a high school coach, I've had 8 guys on my staff that have gone on to be head coaches for the first time. And I take a lot of pride in that. I'm going to empower them. I'm going to give them, they're going to be in those meetings with the parents that are going to be tough. They're going to help make decisions. I want to equip them to be head coaches. So I'm looking for those types of guys because that's what I was at one point. And then lastly, I think, when you become a head coach, the time commitment, like that, we don't keep track of our hours. And if we did, it'd be embarrassing to know that we're getting paid, cents on the dollar. I need people that are going to walk with me in the time commitment and not just punch a clock. Because I think most people look at what we do and go, yeah, I can do what you do. And you see from 7 to 9 at night on a Friday. But all the time invested right now and in the summers and then the player development and the counselor side of it and, all that stuff's involved. You got to get people that are willing to do that and not necessarily know that there's a stipend that comes with that.
Yeah. I think that just to piggyback on that, I think that's huge. You got to have guys and girls that are willing to do whatever it takes. If practice ends at 5:30 and they're in the car at 5:35, we're probably not going to work very well together.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And one thing that's becoming more and more apparent is like, I can teach you about the game, but I need guys that are going to keep problems from getting to me. And I need guys that are going to run social media or help with fundraising or mop the floor and all that stuff. And that doesn't take basketball skill at all. That just takes motivation and finding those people and putting them in positions to help the program is so important. So I appreciate it, Nate. Go ahead.
So the worst part of taking a new job is when you have to go back and tell your former players, your coaching staff, your administration, the community. How did you go about having those discussions? What did you do? I feel like there's no right answer on this. I feel like, sometimes your hands are a little tied. Do your players find out from you? Do they find out from social media? Do they find out from, the newspaper? So sometimes that stuff leaks before you want it. How did you go about telling your previous players that you were going to be taking a new job? We'll start with Coach Moore.
It's a touchy subject because again, you're so invested in your guys and for me this past year, it was very important. I had a great year. One of my favorite teams to be with, just really good guys, great parents, had a lot of success with that. And so the dynamic of going through that process, things leak, people hear it. It's not a one day you interview, the next day you get the job. It's a 2-3 week investment. And so things get out, message board guys on there predicting who's going to get what. And, for me, it's about, I was always up front with my administration. When I was at Kokomo, I let them know about the Fisher circumstance. When I was at Fisher, I let them know a long time in advance about the Warsaw circumstance, just about going through the process and having that line of communication. You go back to that administrative support, I'm going to be very open and honest and direct with what's going on with my administration. And not because I'm unhappy, just because it's a chance to evolve professionally. There's no quick way, because as soon as you tell your first player and you say, hey, don't tell the rest of the guys that he's texting them, right? Or telling his mom and dad, and it's on Twitter 7 minutes later. And, so I text all my guys in a lump, and I just kind of threw it. I said, hey, I want you to know that, I'm not going to be returning next year. I'm going to get with you guys individually. And I think the initial shock, I don't know if you can really talk to them about what's going on and the why behind it. And then I went individually through each guy and had that opportunity later to kind of go into detail as to why. But, in the world we live in, man, it's such a tough thing to do because everybody wants to be the first one to breaking news, and it's kind of unfair to us, but at the same time, I understand it. And you just want to make sure you get to the people that you need to get to in the right way.
Coach Carmichael?
Well, I guess I'll think about some of the ways that I did before, but, you know, it's always hard. And I think you just have to learn not to take it so personal. I mean, there's always going to be a group of kids that you're going to have to leave. So I think that I've learned, you know, throughout all the times that we've both had to make decisions, like Coach said, honesty is the best way to go about it. You're going to earn a lot more respect from people if you're just open and honest and you communicate. So, you know, fortunately for me, I didn't have to go through that this time.
Coach Ballard?
You know, along what Coach Moore said, you know, I tried to keep my principal informed every step of the way. I was in a unique situation where my point guard is also my principal's son. So I kind of had, you know, two dynamics going on there, but she was fantastic at keeping all of that stuff private and never letting it out. And, you know, for me, I was when I got the job, you know, they actually asked that I not announce it right away until it had been board approved. Well, of course, the next day I had started getting text messages saying, "Hey, congratulations, heard you're taking this job." And so now I'm in a situation. It's like, okay, what do? You've been asked to be quiet, but at the same time, you've got kids that are going to start hearing this stuff, and you can't lie to them. I mean, I've known my, you know, the guys that'll be seniors, I've known since they were in 6th grade. And so we've got too good of a relationship for me not to be honest and upfront with them 100%. And so, you know, I made some phone calls, and as I'm making phone calls, again, like Coach Moore said, you make that first phone call and then the text messages start going out. And so what I ultimately had to do, I spoke to some of our returning varsity guys on the phone, and I ultimately had to put out just a statement on Twitter explaining, you know, the situation and what was going on and the why and all of those things. And I'll be honest, I haven't had a single negative reaction. Everybody that I've spoken to at Covington has said, you know, we get it. We're very happy for you. Thank you. You know, all positive stuff. And, but it's difficult, you know, I was going into my 6th year here. And when I got this job, I was 26, 27 years old. So in some ways I've grown up with these kids just as much as they've grown up with me. And so the hardest part is knowing that, you know, you're not going to get to finish things with them. And especially the way our season ended this year, you don't even get that closure of how your last season ended together, which was really tough for us because we felt like we were on our way to making a run in the tournament. And so that made it a little bit harder. But it's, you know, I'm an emotional guy, so I can't say that I didn't miss breaking down and crying in front of all of them at a meeting. That was something I was not looking forward to.
So, and Coach Ballard, you kind of mentioned it there, how Pendleton had asked you to kind of hold off on making an announcement. You know, I didn't have, you know, Whiteland didn't ask me to hold off, but with my situation, I was hired the week before school started and everything happened so quickly. I accepted the job, and, you know, I had my final interview, accepted the job about, you know, 30 minutes after the interview ended, was board approved the next night. But, you know, I don't know how you guys feel about this. I knew that as soon as I was board approved, it would become public. And I had such a genuine relationship with my players that I felt like I've got to tell them in person before they find out, you know, through the news or whatever. So I actually met with my team the morning before I was board approved. And, you know, some people might think, well, that's jumping the gun a little bit. What happens if something goes wrong at the board meeting? To me, it was, you know, the likelihood of that happening is not very high. And, you know, my relationship with my players was priority to me. So I felt like that was the right way to do it. Now, I know that some people might feel like, well, that's taking a chance that you don't want to take. And I get all that. But, you know, does anybody else feel like you should wait for the board meeting to be officially approved, or do you try to, let your players know in a respectful time based on your relationship?
I mean, for me, I think it comes down to, I think you have to be cognizant of what your new school wants. I think that, if they ask you to keep it quiet because it's not official, I think you have to respect that. But, at the same time, I kind of went against what they said because I didn't want to be in a position where I wasn't telling the truth. I got the phone call being offered the job. I was actually on my way to Lake Freeman for the weekend. So I wasn't even in town to be able to tell anybody if I wanted to be able to go tell anybody. And when I started getting text messages and things the next day, I just felt like, I have to decide who do I want to upset? Do I want to take a chance at upsetting this new school, or do I want all these people that I built relationships with over the years to feel like I've lied to them and haven't been honest with them? And I don't know that I made the right choice, but I made the choice of talking to the guys that I had relationships with and making sure they heard about it from me. I think you have to kind of, and Pendleton understood. I mean, they weren't upset with me or anything like that. The athletic director school board was very understanding of what my position was when all of that came out. But I think you just kind of have to, like Coach Moore said early in the interview, I think you got to control what you can control. And when something starts to get out of your control, the best thing you can do is just make a decision that you feel like is right.
Right.
I think to counter with that, what I have learned in this is be present all the time. Like you don't know if this last game with these guys is the last time with like Jeffrey Simmons and Charlie Smith and Bryce and Fordsey and Drew. Like, I did not know that was going to be the last time I was going to get a chance to coach those guys. And, I think it's important, and it's been beneficial for me. Like, I don't want to do this 20 more years. I want to do this 1 year, 20 different times. Because I think then you can stay engaged, you can stay, dialed in. And if you coach that way, like I'm all in right now with this group, here we go. I have found myself to be, I've gotten more from it personally, and I think I've been able to give more to them. And so I think, you can't, I don't get a chance to coach those guys this summer, and it's disappointing, but I feel like I gave them everything I had when I was there. And that's something that at least I can leave there knowing I was able to do.
So we'll jump to our next question. So as you're making your transition to your new job, and we kind of discussed this a little bit earlier when we talked about style of play, but, I guess the first question is, and people do it both ways, but when you take your new job, are you planning on taking a system with you that you've used for a while and making tweaks to that based on personnel? Or are you looking to go in and evaluate your new team and figure out a scheme that's completely personnel driven? So we'll start with that. And we'll start with Coach Carmichael.
I think you always have to go in and evaluate your team. Like Coach said earlier, yeah, I'd love to press all the time and be able to guard people and play fast and shoot layups and threes, but it doesn't always work out that way. So I think you have to. Every job that I've taken, we've had to play a little bit differently. So you have to evaluate your kids. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses going to be with that group, and figure out how you can most be successful with the kids that you have.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sorry.
No, you're good. I was going to say Coach Ballard, so you're on it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you have to go in and evaluate. I think as a coach, I know for me, there are core things offensively and defensively that we're always going to do regardless of the team that I have. But I feel like if I went in to Pendleton on day one and I'm trying to do things that we were doing in year 4 and year 5 at Covington, I'm kind of setting myself up for failure. I can't go in there because it's not Covington. These guys don't know me. They don't know what I'm talking about terminology wise and things like that. So I think you've got to go in and you have to evaluate, and you have to be open-minded, but at the same time, I don't think you can go into a new program and try and reinvent the wheel. I mean, part of the reason you're at this new program is because of who you are and what you've done. And so I think you have to make sure that you stay committed to who you are as a coach. And if you are like, you know, I'm a big motion guy. I'm a big man defense guy. So I can't go to Pendleton and all of a sudden decide to be like, you know, I want to be like Coach Moore and run the flow offense, or I want to be like, you know, Jim Boeheim and I'm going to run all 2-3 zone or something like that. I think you have to stick with who you are, but at the same time, be open-minded about making adjustments and making changes where they're needed.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you need to know going into the job you're taking what has been the precedent of how they've played. You know, Garrett just left Warren Central and took my former position at Fishers. And, you know, the last 6 years, Warren Central's been pretty good playing full court pressure, you know. So if you were to go into that job and say, you know what, we're just gonna slow it down, we're gonna play in the half court, we're gonna, you know, like, you could do that, but it's not what they've been accustomed to learning how to play. And I think you got to know what you're going into. I take three things in any job I've gone into. I think I can be pretty adaptable offensively and defensively. It's kind of the blessing and the curse of loving coaching. If I need to teach a motion, I've played in motion, I can teach motion. If I need to run sets, I can do that. The old adage of play hard, play smart, play together, right? And I've extended those to three different things. Of playing hard to me is pride. Like watching some of my guys right now in AAU, they think they play hard, but they don't play with pride. And I think when you play with pride and it says Snyder on the front, or it says Mooresville, or it says Martinsville, or it says, you know, Tippy Val, whatever it says on the front, like there's a pride that comes with that, and you're going to defend that. And I think getting guys to understand that playing with pride is a priority. So in the off season, teaching them what that looks like. The second, play smart, is the competence piece. I think our job is to teach the game. This last year at Fishers, we were the number 2 ranked team in the state in three-point percentage. We shot 44% as a team. A lot of that has to do with understanding what a good shot is. And it's not that we had guys, you know, Alex Salaji was a great shooter, but other than that, we just had guys that took good shots. And I think the competence side of teaching the game is what we're trying to do. And not just getting mad at guys, but like explaining the why and the how behind it. So play hard, pride, play smart, competence. And the third one, play together, the selflessness of getting guys to understand that if we are going to do this, then there's a certain way we have to go about it. One of the things that we have, all of us kind of have our connections with our kids. We have them grouped off right now, and one of the components, part of their workouts, is a communication component. They have to share a quote or a video or a tweet that is in some way revealing to leadership or camaraderie or something like that inside their little text group. And our coaches are inside of those groups as well. Because again, I think whatever you put in their mind, if it's positive or negative, they're going to feed into that. And so we're trying to do that as much as we can. So play hard, play smart, play together, which reveals in pride, competency, and selflessness. Those are the things that we're trying to get our guys in the off season to figure out.
That's really
I really
good
like
stuff.
I really like what Coach said, and I'm fortunate that I get to talk a lot of basketball with Levi at home. But I know for both of us, every time that we go into a new coaching position, we always try to look at our kids and think about, you know, what are our non-negotiables going to be? And we always try to come up with like 2 or 3 things. What are we going to be really good at? So I know with my new coaching staff, that's something that we've spent a lot of time talking about. You know, what can our kids be really successful at? What are we always going to, we want to win in every game. So I know our number 1 thing on our list right now is rebounding. Everybody can rebound, but, you know, we can really improve upon that because, you know, I think that we can yell block out at our kids all day. But I don't know that our kids right now really know what that truly means. So like our number 1 non-negotiable this year is going to be rebounding. So that's a big thing that we've talked about.
Yeah, that's great. And, you know, some of the things you guys just mentioned goes into this next question. So, you know, all 3 of you, you know, have said that you have some foundational pieces to what you do. You know who you are as coaches, but, you know, as you try to find your system or your scheme, you're going to be also, you know, paying attention to personnel and trying to evaluate your strengths and weaknesses. Coach Ballard, you mentioned some core beliefs. Coach Carmichael talking about the non-negotiables. When you get back on the court, whenever you can and whenever you can start teaching, what are you going to start teaching? Whether that's defensive, offensive, whether you're drilling certain, small, foundational skills, whatever it is. When you take the court, what are some of the most important things you'll start with when you get to teaching? Coach Moore?
We're only going to have 10 days this July. And I'm going to include our freshmen. There are 4 of those sessions that are going to include our middle school players. We are fortunate that we're able to have camps. I think a lot of people have been canceled in that realm, but our administration is full behind it. Let's go with camps. So we've got a junior high elite camp. We've got a middle school shooting camp coming up. I think at the high school level, defense is always ahead of offense, no matter when you start in that stuff. I think for us to compete in our sectional, we got to be able to guard Penn and Northridge. Those are the 2 teams that are up at the top. We're going to put our defensive system in because it's such a change from how they've played in the past. They've been a pack line team. We're going to be a no-middle team. We're going to be up the line a little bit more. We're not going to switch. So I think some of those habits are going to take a little bit of time. That's why I think on the offensive side, we're going to run a little bit more sets because we're going to dictate maybe who's going to get those shots where. But for us, we're going to start on the defensive side. We're going to spend a lot of our theme this year is old school tough. And most of us have a different maybe image in our mind of what old school tough looks like. But it's a physical, nasty type of group. And so for our guys, to me, that's what Warsaw is. And we're going to do it on the defensive end. I think offensively, we need to get 30% of our offense out of transition, which means we get stops and we can go. That's not been necessarily how they've played in the past. So getting them to kind of open that up a little bit is going to be something that we'll have to really go. But for us, it's defensively. We're putting in our defensive stuff. We're playing in transition. That's what most of our summer is going to be.
Awesome. Coach Carmichael?
I agree with Coach Moore. Just in those 10 days, the biggest thing that we've talked about doing is spending time on defense. I think Coach Shelby Glebe was our coach last year, and she just took the New Albany job, but she did a great job of implementing her defensive system last year. She happens to be a good friend of mine, so I think we're going to just stick with that. So we're going to spend a lot of time, probably just changing some terminology, the way that I teach things, but just trying to get better defensively. I mentioned rebounding. We're going to start day one talking about rebounding, since that's going to be a big thing for us. Spending a lot of time talking about our core values, but I'm fortunate I get to have middle school. I get to have all of our kids in there together because we're small enough to do that. So just spending a lot of time on fundamentals too. I know we're behind just from not having a feeder system and things like that. So I just want to get in there with the kids and start continuing to build those relationships, especially with our younger kids, and just getting them used to me and how I do things and the terminology that I use for different things.
Coach Ballard?
Yeah, I totally agree. For me, we'll start on the defensive end. You can have bad shooting nights, but you can't have a bad shooting night on defense. So if you're committed to getting stops, you're going to be in it no matter what. And I think defense is just as much about your attitude and the way you look at it as it is about how good of a basketball player you are. I think being good at defense is a choice. And so, that's something we'll start with right away. I think for us to be successful, we're going to have to be the most skilled basketball team in the area. So we're going to work a ton on our fundamentals, on dribbling, passing, shooting, scoring, individual defense. And then on the other end of the floor, my philosophy behind that is if you have kids that are skilled, you can do anything you want on offense. You can run whatever you want to run. If you got guys that can dribble, pass, and shoot, guys that understand how to move without the ball, you can do just about anything you want. And so to me, starting at that, that fundamental level, that skill level, and then building up from there, I think transition is very important. And something we talk about a lot in our program is we before me. And a term that we'll use a lot offensively is getting our shot. What shot do we want as a team? Getting not who's taking it, not where is it coming from, but is it our shot? Is it within what we're wanting to do? And I think getting that philosophy ingrained, that it's about us, it's about we, and it's not about me, whether at a coaching level or a player level. I think those are the things that I really want to establish in those, those first 6-7 open gyms and workouts that we're going to have.
That's good stuff, Coach. So before I get to our last question, I want to introduce somebody that's on our call right now. His name is Tanner Hedrick. Tanner is the new head coach at Knightstown High School. I feel like I'm pretty young at 31, but Tanner was a former player of mine. Now, I started coaching young, but, when your first former player gets a head coaching job, it really makes you feel old. But Tanner has spent the last 6 years coaching at Rushville High School, 3 years as a freshman coach, 3 years as the JV coach, and he spent some time coaching middle school before that. Tanner played on our 2010-2011 Rushville team. We were number 2 in 3A in the final AP poll behind the Washington Hatchets led by Cody Zeller. And Tanner was a part of that group. And now Tanner is a first-year head coach. He's joining us today. I had asked Tanner if he had any questions for you guys. And so, Tanner, I'm going to let you go ahead and ask your question, and we'll kind of go from there.
I guess the first initial question that I had when I'm starting this job and I'm trying to get to know these players, and you guys have talked about it some, outside of like Zoom meetings or going to meet them, have you guys done anything creative to meet like the whole feeder program or try to reach all of these kids in these communities that you're taking over? Right now I've been doing like a drill of the day and asking for video submissions so I can get to know a face and name and grade. Just, are you guys doing any different things regarding that?
Well, I'll go first because mine will be short. I'm not allowed any physical contact. So even if I got a lot, they're doing all kinds of things, but I am not allowed to be there. I'm not allowed to have any physical contact until July 6th. So like I would love to be able to drive over to houses and introduce myself, but we're just not allowed to do that. So my route has been very much like what you're describing. It's been through text messages, it's been through, Twitter and things like that. But what I've been very encouraged by more than anything else is a lot of these guys have taken it upon themselves to organize groups to work out and to go play. And to me, I'm really pumped up about that because it tells me they're hungry and they want to get after this thing.
Yeah.
What I've done is, we're so restricted, right? And so I look, Jeremy does great stuff. Nate does great stuff. Heath Howington, all these guys, I'm searching what other guys are doing because there may be something out there that doesn't necessarily fit my personality that I thought, I should try that. One thing I try to do, and I really do my very, very best, and this is tough because we just had our 5th child and my wife's very, very supportive in allowing me to do this, but I try to go watch their AAU practices and their AAU games. This weekend, I'm going to go watch 7 of my guys play. I'm going to drive up to Fort Wayne twice, once in the morning and once in the evening, because, again, I think that just shows your support. It's not like I'm, coaching them, but I'm there. And that, I think, means a lot to your guys, especially they don't know you. They don't know me. You're trying to establish trust. And one of the ways I can drive, 2 hours and sit in a bleacher and watch you and then drive back and text you, hey, man, great to see you, maybe try this. I think those are ways you can establish that relationship to build. I told you before, like our summer workout's called Money in the Bank. And so you're just making deposits, anything you do, maybe going to lunch with a kid or just texting them or calling them or Zooming them, whatever you can do, you're just making deposits at this point. Because again, there's going to be a time when things are tough and you got to make a withdrawal that they understand where it's coming from.
Yeah.
I think the only other thing I had to add, I've tried to send out little cards to some of our kids and even some of our feeder kids, just to let them know that I'm thinking about them, because we're also on no contact until July 6th. So I've tried to do that, just being able to let them know that I'm trying to build that relationship. We have a Facebook page, so Facebook Live is something that we've tried to use. Kids could ask questions or go on there and just while you're introducing yourself. But I've also just tried to steal ideas from other people.
Yeah, and then another question that I had was, you're talking about installing your defense and doing rebounding with the stipulations of having to be 5-on-0. How do you plan on teaching these things come July? I know terminology is a huge thing, but without having an offense out there to shadow or move so the defense moves, how do you plan on teaching your defensive scheme and really drilling it?
I think it's like everything else. It's kind of the whole part whole method. So, you got to be good at what happens a lot. Well, closeouts happen a lot. So and it doesn't mean it needs to be 3 hours of closeouts, right? I mean, guys are, going to quit. But I think you got to prioritize and look at, it's a unique time for us to do something that we always say, man, we got to spend more time on rebound pursuit or on gap rotate, like whatever that is that you never make time in practice to do. That's probably what you should start doing right now, right? And so I think all of us say, man, we just don't have enough practice time to make sure we're doing this. That's what I would probably spend your time doing. And for us, it's going to be a lot about gap presence and closeouts and angles and some of that stuff that necessarily you don't need an offense for, but you also have to build your kids' imagination. I don't think right now there are too many kids, unless there's a scorekeeper in uniforms and refs, that they're going to go out and go gain speed. And that's they need to learn how to do. So anything you can rep to build the habit is going to be a benefit to your program.
Yeah. Well, and I would also say that kind of goes back to having great assistant coaches. You can do some things that are technically 4-on-0 or 5-on-0 if you got 4 or 5 coaches out there that are in good enough shape and are skilled and competent enough to simulate some things, whether it's your defensive positioning or coach mentioned close outs, or if it's block outs, or jump into the ball, talk and work. If you have a good staff that can simulate,
I agree with what Dave said. We're going to just spend a lot of time breaking things down. We're probably going to play a lot of zone this next year. So we're using my coaches to talk a lot about coverages and just different situations with that. But just a lot of breakdown stuff too, because you have to be able to play man to be good at zone as well, because you're guarding in your area. So just planning on doing a lot of breakdown stuff that they can do without, having to be 5-on-0.
Makes sense.
Okay, go ahead. Tanner, do you have any more?
No, I'm good.
Okay, you're good. Tanner, thank you for joining us today and having some questions for us. I'd like to open it up to anybody else. If anybody has any other questions for any of our coaches on here, this would be the time to ask those now.
I've got a comment. Again, this is the third job at the high school level I've had, and I think when there is a transition, there's some anxiety that comes with it. And what I've learned to do that's benefited me is you really have to establish and understand it is a marathon. Like, you're not winning the sectional on June 17th. Your players obviously have to put the time in, but you as a coach need to have the balance of being able to be present when it's time to be present and be able to get away from it when it's time to be away from it. And that's something that I think you have to master yourself based on your personality. I like doing yard work. Some people like to golf. Whatever your hobbies are, you got to have some to be able to get away. And be patient and keep it simple. That was one thing. I got a chance to meet John Wooden years ago. And I'm I got my pen. I'm like, coach, I'm going to be a head coach. What do I need to do? And he just goes, Matt, you got to be patient. You got to keep it simple. Yeah, but what else, and there wasn't anything else. And as you get into it, I think sometimes we put so much emphasis, well, we got to get all the stuff in because we didn't have a gym. The reality is you just got to have a couple things that you can be really good at and then give your kids a chance to go compete and then make adjustments as you go. And I think don't put too much in and don't overwhelm your kids and everybody's going to be fine. So that's just my advice.
Yeah, I totally agree. The only thing I would add, some of the best advice I ever got as a young coach was be you. Be the best Coach Ballard that you can be. If I try to, I worked under Cliff Hawkins for years, and if I go and try and be Cliff Hawkins, I'm going to fail. I can take a lot of the things that I learned from him and absorb from him and adapt them to what I do, but at the end of the day, if I'm trying to be anybody but me, it's probably not going to go very well. So that's the best advice I can give is go be you, do it your way, and be committed to doing it your way. Don't allow yourself to sway, just like that patience thing. Don't allow yourself to sway if you don't get the results right away, because in this business, things never happen as quickly as we want them to.
I think the advice that I would add that I've learned over the years is don't be afraid to be vulnerable. If you're having a bad day, your kids know you're having a bad day. I've learned, especially in coaching girls, they know, they can read your face, and just don't be afraid to tell them you're having a bad day. If something's going on with you, they want to know about it. And that's just a part of building the relationships. And I think that's something that I've not been very good at in the past. I try to hide my emotions, and the kids know, they see right through you. So just don't be afraid to be vulnerable and let them see you and see your true self as well.
Well, coaches, if we don't have any other questions, thank you guys for being on this morning. It was kind of a unique idea to try to get, three coaches on here that were taking new jobs and just kind of do a Q&A, but I thought it went really well. I wish you guys the best of luck in year one. Don't forget, be patient. It's going to take longer than year one, but you guys are great coaches, and you're going to do a great job. So thank you guys for joining us today.